I'm aware that it's always difficult after lunch to do a session on energy. Energy is one of those things you do after lunch. Music in Africa, in my experience, is what you do after lunch, where you get a lot of music. But in order not to make the panel feel like you don't want them to be here, a round of applause would be deeply appreciated for them. Would be deeply appreciated. I also want to take the opportunity to thank ExxonMobil for paying for our lunch and everything that we're doing here. So ExxonMobil, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, ExxonMobil. Sort of two things. One, first, we don't want to sugarcoat the problems that we have in the energy sector. And so this panel is not a panel to make my good friend, the Deputy Minister, feel good here. So that's generally first order business. The second point is that we don't also want to dwell on the problems. We want to find a way we want to find solutions to whatever we think is confronting the solution. What is good, though, is that we do not have doomsaw anymore in this country. And I think a round of applause for the Deputy Minister who So I think we will start off with Mr. Minister. I think you want to make some opening remarks and then we can start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be part of this very important discussion. So in discussing the energy sector, there are three things that should come to mind. Number one, government believes in long-term planning for the sector. And therefore, we are not blinded by short-term measures that cannot be sustained. And we believe in this because businesses also have long-term planning. And therefore, if we are generating energy to incentivize investment, to support industrial activity and the growth of businesses, we must be aligned in our planning. And this is why we also believe in long-term planning, to be able to generate the quantity of energy that will be required by the growing business sector, by the growing economy. So that is number one. And so if you want to do business in Ghana, to invest in Ghana, you should know that your energy needs are going to be met in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years from today. And that is what I believe will sustain the growth of your business and reduce the cost of your business and improve on your profitability for that matter. Number two, we have so much waste in the use of energy. And so we also want to ensure efficient use of energy. This is why government is adopting measures, including conservation measures, including education and awareness for our citizens on how efficiently they can use energy resources so that we will continue to have surplus to be able to meet the growing demand for energy. Number three, we also believe in diversity of sources because no source, one source is sustainable. And this is why we're also adopting lately renewable energy sources to complement the non-renewable energy sources. And so moving from the use of light crude oil to gas, and many people have described natural gas as the energy of the moment because it is cleaner, it is more efficient. And therefore, from natural gas, we hope to graduate to scaling up the use of renewable sources such as solar, wind, etc., etc. And so through diversity of sources, we can be able to sustain our energy supply to meet the demands of industry and our economy. And so these are three fundamental pillars I would like to lay as we discuss our desire to build an energy sector that can support our economy, so that we can be assured that government is not going to turn back on businesses as far as reducing your cost of operation is concerned. We are not going to turn back in shortening your planning for growing your businesses. And also, we will not turn back on you when it comes to creating the enabling environment within which your businesses would thrive.
Thank you very much. Kofi, you work with Cosmos as commercial director. Do you want to sort of comment on what the minister has said?
Hello? I think I would like to say a few words. It's refreshing to hear the three pillars that he just described. I think if you look at the oil and gas sector, especially in the upstream side of things, these are things that we also look out for. And a typical example would be if you look at our agreements, typically it's over a period of 25 to 30 years. So that involves a lot of planning from your exploration stage through your appraisal and development and also through production. So if there's a clear map out there that you can actually look at, it helps you and keeps you informed of what you need to look for in terms of your investment. And also, particularly with respect to gas, if you want to link that to a long-term plan that Ghana actually has, it helps you figure out what to do with either associated or non-associated gas. So that's a little bit to that.
Right. Cindy, you've been working on renewables for some time now, and the minister touched on renewables. Do you want to throw more light on?
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm C.D. Glenn. I'm the president of the U.S. African Development Foundation. We are the U.S. government agency's African Enterprise Agency. We focus on identifying, developing, and growing grassroots, small and medium-sized enterprises. And we do that in certain areas of need and areas of challenge that Africans face. And so historically, we've been focused a lot around food security, agriculture to agribusiness. We have a large concentration in terms of youth and youth entrepreneurship, but increasingly we see the need to focus our programs and our investments, our startup capital in the area of energy, and particularly off-grid energy. So when the minister mentioned renewables, it was music to my ears, because part of our mission and mandate is really to provide for those who have not, to work in underserved communities, to really help poor and vulnerable populations become part of Africa's growth story and Ghana's growth story. And I've heard over the past couple of days statistics around access to energy in Ghana being about 85%. And then there's the 15% that's quote unquote could be left behind. And so part of what we want to do is make sure that those in rural areas have energy opportunities and energy access. It's often said with poor and vulnerable populations that the poor can't pay for energy and they're not connected to the grid. But the poor pay more for energy than any of us. They buy candles every day, they buy kerosene every day, they buy diesel every day, they buy charcoal every day. And so they're already paying for energy. So can we invest in them, invest in their ideas, come up with innovative solutions so that the poor can have access to stable sources of energy, clean sources of energy. And in Ghana, we're proud to say that as part of our work aligned with Power Africa, we have supported 7 Ghanaian energy entrepreneurs to develop, to design, to expand, to grow businesses that are in the solar space and the bio space. So we have investments in Ghana, in remote areas in the northern region, in Ashanti, Lake Volta, Eastern, and then even in the peri-urban Accra area, where we are working with Ghanaian energy entrepreneurs, providing them with seed capital and technical assistance to grow their businesses. These are not connected to the grid, and if the grid could connect everyone, I'm not sure it would be even affordable. And so how do we have solutions for those who will never really be connected to the grid? And so part of our mission and our mandate is to provide that seed capital, that project management assistance, to to really help those who are beyond the grid to at least have access to energy. And Ghana is a shining example of a country that, at least in its energy mix, is understanding the power and the promise of renewable energy and solar and wind and bio and hydro. So proud to be a part of the solution that the Ghanaian government is establishing, and really proud of the work that my colleague Andy will share under the Power Africa initiative.
Thank you. It's all been positive so far, Mr. Minister. So you should. Leader, do you want to add something?
Sure. So I'm Lyda Fitz. I'm the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. And USTDA is U.S. government's project preparation agency, which means that we invest in early stage development of infrastructure projects to help these projects get to the point where they are bankable, where they're either ready for the government to provide financing or ready for commercial financing. And Ghana's always been a priority country for us since the beginning of our agency over 25 years ago. And across the continent, we've done about 500 projects. Here in Ghana, energy has been a real focus for us. We've worked with Gridco, with NEDCO, we've worked on transmission lines. And I was interested to hear the Minister talk about the importance of that planning aspect, because that has really been helpful to us. Ghana's own planning and directing our assistance when Ghana made it clear that it was inviting the private sector in to help expand the energy sector in terms of IPPs. We responded in supporting Ghanaian businesses, Ghanaian IPPs in developing Ghana's own natural resources to provide energy. We've given a grant for a biomass plant using Ghanaian bamboo and rice, for a wind power plant, as well as a solar one. And all of those are moving forward, hoping to go into production to increase Ghana's overall energy resources. And as many of you saw, we earlier signed today with the Ministry of Finance and Energy a grant looking at mini-grids. So it's not surprising that following CD, we often work together, particularly in this space, and looking at potential to expand mini-grids en masse. And here, looking at 67 communities across Afro and Plain South, in developing what would be a potentially commercially viable solution for the ministry to be able to support and for private sector firms to come in and bring innovative solutions. I think what's interesting about this particular effort is it also reflects other part of our mission, which is to look for where U.S. firms can really bring value. Is there something where the U.S. has a lot of expertise or technology that could be useful in strengthening the infrastructure? And mini-grids, particular containerized solutions, are something that the U.S. has really developed very innovative technology in. And so we're able to say, okay, in scouting out and designing, where and how these projects can be designed and providing a route into Exim financing, it's a way to make available some of these technologies on a competitive basis into Ghana to help get to that last 15%. So we really do think that there are opportunities for a win-win relationship. I know we've talked about that a lot today, of how Ghana and the U.S. can win together. And certainly in energy, we've seen a lot of demand from both the U.S. side and the Ghanaian side to look for those partnerships.
Thank you, Leader. Andrew, the Africa Power.
Power Africa.
Our Power Africa. Does it make a big difference?
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Power Africa brings together the tools that are all sitting on this stage. It's the U.S. government's effort to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa through partnership with the private sector driving that development. And we've had a massive difference in Ghana, but there's still a lot of work to do. When you look at the sector as a whole, we estimate that the sector is losing about $1 billion a year. And so the inclination would be to try to raise tariffs, and raising tariffs with their cost reflective is always helpful, but there are things that we've been doing and that we'll continue to do, and we need to do more to chip away at that debt. One, if you look at something as basic as time of use tariffs. You can hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. time of use tariffs. That's a simple way to try to generate more revenues, encourage industry to use power at off hours and adjust the tariffs accordingly. What we've done in Nigeria, we went into distribution companies, helped them increase efficiencies and reduce losses, and helped them generate, in 4 of the distribution companies, over $80 million. So there's little things that you can do. If you look at retiring some of the older assets that are less efficient, which brings down the cost as well. But even things that we're doing to help generate more revenues for the sector, Power Africa brought an engineer into the Tweneboa gas processing plant, which produces about 300 million cubic feet of gas a day, which is going to provide the fuel to about 1,500 megawatts of thermal generation. That was basically defunct and inoperational. It had been built by Chinese and just wasn't an effective project. And so by simply coming in and helping with the engineering, we were able to turn that around. So Power Africa, it's a lot of hard work ahead of us, but we're making a very, very big difference, both in the on-grid, which I just discussed, but also in the off-grid, which Lida and CD mentioned as well.
Let me put you on the spot. I know you'll be leaving in a few minutes.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have to catch a flight.
But we're not too sure whether the new dispensation is still very supportive of the Power Africa project.
Sure.
You may want to assure that.
I think everyone can be assured about that. I think we've seen our Secretary of Commerce talk about Power Africa in the meetings with the President, and otherwise we signed an MOU yesterday with the Ministry of Power, just renewing that relationship as well. Our funding is in good shape. We have bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress. We've had multiple U.S. cabinet secretaries talk about Power Africa as not just a good model for what we're doing in trying to electrify the continent, but a model that can be replicated to other geographical areas and to other sectors as well.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, the local content is a big issue. So my questions will deal with just broad themes generally. 1 hour is not enough. But I'm not, I mean, maybe you would enlighten us whether you have been able to find the balance between local participation, local content, local employment versus sort of transfer of technology and transfer of expertise. Have you been able to find the balance in your tenure in office?
Well, I think the local content is very important for us as a government. There are 3 components that we're looking up to in promoting local content. Number 1 is local employment, as you rightly mentioned. But that will mean giving skills to our people to be able to compete for the jobs. Because even if you do not bring expatriates, your own citizens will have to compete for the jobs, and that will mean those who have the requisite skills are those that will have the opportunity to get the jobs. And this is what we have negotiated in our contracts. The international petroleum agreements we've negotiated with foreign companies put emphasis on those who have the requisite skills to be given the opportunity to work in their projects. The second part is equity participation. By equity participation, the law requires a minimum of 5% reserved for local companies in a petroleum license. We appreciate the challenges some of our local partners, of our local companies have in securing the necessary financing to be able to fund their equity. And therefore, government has been discussing a certain proposal, what we call the warehousing policy, so that in the case of the Exxon contract, for example, where they have difficulty in getting a local partner that may be able to finance its cash calls for its equity, we may ask a state company, a company in which the state has significant interest, to take that equity and warehouse it up to the point that it can offload it either on the stock exchange or where a local Ghanaian that has the capacity to finance that equity is ready to take up that equity. The third component, which is also very important for us, is local sourcing of goods and services. And here again, if you look at our contracts, we're talking about giving subcontracts to local companies who can produce the quality required by the contractors and who can deliver at the time required by the contractor. And so while we recognize the need to give some concession to Ghanaians, we also recognize the requirements of the industry. It's an industry that requires quality. It's an industry that requires skills. So how do we balance our desire to improve local capacity building and at the same time attract transfer skills from foreign companies and expatriates? To do this, we know that this industry is not a local industry. It is a global industry. And therefore, whoever we are promoting from our country to work in the industry must have the standards or must be able to meet the global standards of the industry. And this is why we expect that companies that operate in Ghana will partner with Ghanaians to provide on-the-job training for them so that gradually they also can acquire the skills that meet the global standards of this global industry to be able to work effectively in the industry. And so recently, as was announced by the Vice President, the government launched the Accelerated Oil and Gas Capacity Building Program, which is our flagship program of positioning Ghanaians to be able to work in this industry through acquisition of skills. 7 institutions have been well equipped to global standards to train Ghanaians in welding, in mechanics, in engineering, so they can have the skills that the companies require to be able to work in the industry. Same applies to local Ghanaian companies. The Petroleum Commission recently went on a trade mission to Aberdeen. I was part of the delegation. More than 40 Ghanaian companies were taken there to discuss with Scottish companies, share ideas on the standards they require to do business in Ghana, and then to support them to build partnerships, the necessary partnerships that will help our own companies to come up and to be able to compete for contracts in the industry. And so from all the 3 components of local content, in terms of skills so that our people can work, in terms of sourcing local goods and services so that our own companies can be able to win contracts and supply goods and services, in terms of equity, we are interested in promoting that further. But as I said, we recognize that we cannot get it in one day. It has to be a partnership between us and our foreign partners to be able to build the capacity to be able to balance the 2 objectives of attracting foreign companies, but at the same time preparing our own people to play frontal roles in the industry.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Usually when local content comes up, you're sort of, I think this is the first time I've seen somebody explain local content from a politician explain it in simple terms, in very, very simple terms. Andrew, you want to say something?
I do, because I have to catch a plane. So I do want to talk about local content in Power Africa and a lot of the things that we do, because why it's different than a lot of the other initiatives and other investment approaches that you take. One of my favorite statistics is I look at General Electric, GE, and when they first came onto the continent, about 90% of their personnel were expatriate personnel. Today, GE has about 1,600 employees on the continent. 95% of them are Africans. That's the American model. The American model is to try to build local capacity. Not only do we think it's the right thing to do, it's also less expensive. It makes business sense to bring an American overseas with all of the expenses and expat things. It doesn't make financial sense. So we build capacity from a business standpoint, and it's the right thing to do. But Power Africa took it a step further. We want to make sure that the deals that African governments are negotiating are fair and sustainable. So we developed several books that are, there's tens of thousands of copies of these books in circulation. And the books were drafted by Americans, Africans, others working together that offer different perspectives on negotiating power sector deals. One is, and Department of Commerce put these out. They're available on the Department of Commerce, the Commercial Law Development Program's website. One is understanding power project financing. One is understanding power purchasing agreements. One of them is understanding power project procurement. Another one is understanding gas and LNG. And these are areas where we felt like there was the capacity that needed to be built. And these books are on the shelves of ministries across the continent because we see the importance of doing that. This is why you want local content. You want the jobs, you want the knowledge, you want the sustainability. And even from a sustainability standpoint, you want to make sure that you've got the best quality products also so that the projects move forward. I visited the Sen Power project yesterday, and I was You know, when we were thinking about it, you know, it's not a major U.S. project in terms of U.S. investment, but 19 U.S. companies contributed to that project, which is going to generate about 13% of Ghana's power. It might have been engineering, it might have been parts or components that are top-notch. They're going to make sure that the quality is absolutely top-notch. What you don't want are have local content requirements that are going to scare off that type of contribution, even though it may not be the primary contribution. And one last warning on local content, because I've seen this happen in another country. If the local investment content is too high, often what it does, it'll backfire. And I've seen in one country where I saw the same individual who had no private sector or power sector experience, but who created an energy company because he was local, got to invest in 9 power projects. Somebody who was already a billionaire. Now, is that trying to achieve the goal that the politicians are trying to achieve by making sure the wealth is spread? Or are you simply making a wealthy person wealthier? So I would really, really caution about how these things are implemented. And I was really happy to hear the president yesterday in the meeting with the Secretary Ross mention that he understands the concerns about local content regulations and that we will take it slowly and make sure that they absolutely make sense. So it's great having a reasonable partner like the government of Ghana.
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, would you want to say? Yeah, Mr. Minister would want to say something. Yes.
I mean, I get worried when companies complain about restrictive local content regulations. I like to promote partnerships with companies that see local capacity development as a business strategy rather than as a compliance issue with local laws or regulations. And therefore, companies that put partnerships that will inure to the benefits of both parties in terms of preparing the local people to also have their share of the cake, either through working or through equity. I don't think any law that promotes this can be called a restrictive law. In fact, companies that put local partnership and capacity building at the heart of their operations are companies that gain legitimacy to work in any environment, to live in harmony with communities where they operate, as opposed to areas where there is hostility between companies and communities, as we have seen in some countries such as Nigeria and elsewhere. And therefore, it will be good for those of you who want to invest in our oil and gas industry to have internal processes that prioritize local capacity development as a business strategy. Because through that, you legitimize your stay, and not necessarily because a law requires you to do that. So, and if you look at countries that have also brought in such laws, there are countries that are emerging, frontier nations, where capacity is low, and where people are worried that if they do not have certain regulations that will guide such partnerships. And we have seen that in many other countries where companies have gone in and went out without impacting on the communities. That may be the reason why frontier countries or emerging countries have set local content laws. For one, I'm not a believer in having local content regulations, but where they are required as a guide, you know, and not necessarily to restrict your operation, not to punish you, I think we should support that. And this is why I want to encourage companies that are against local content to change their model, to demonstrate to countries where they go that as part of their internal strategy, local capacity building is part of it. Then they will not see as punishment countries where laws require them to meet similar standards.
I think on this note, a club may be in order. A club may be in order. Yes.
No, I want to compliment what Andy said and the Honorable Minister. I think it's absolutely correct that you can look at local content as a business strategy, operational strategy, a development strategy. And I think more and more you see U.S. agencies, development institutions taking that route. I mean, the prime example, the biggest example in our government is MCC, which is a real partnership with countries to country and looking at local content and local ownership. But even at the U.S. African Development Foundation, everything about our operations, everything about our model is really to maximize the localization of development, where we are 100% committed to local economic development. We want to create local businesses, local Ghanaian businesses that can link to American businesses, because as Andy was mentioning, we need more and more Ghanaian micro, small, medium-sized enterprises to be able to trade with and support and buy from and sell to American businesses. So the localizing of small businesses within the U.S. and within Africa. And then how do we create those small businesses? We link them. We link these Ghanaian businesses with local capacity. So all of the business management, the mentorship, the business advisory services that the local grassroots, small, medium-sized enterprises that we find and we fund and we support, all of that support is done also by local technical assistance by Ghanaian firms and Ghanaian organizations. So we really do, quote unquote, keep it local in all that we do. And ultimately, that's a value proposition that's you know, beyond measure, because it localizes development. There's true local ownership of the projects and of the programs. And so for us, it's not only a value proposition, it's sort of how we operate, localizing development so that Africans own their own future. And we talk about that at ADF as giving Africans a voice and a choice in their own development, where we really are meeting them where they are and helping go further together. But it's not about top down, it really is bottom up, and it's driven from here to really help move economies and move local communities.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, I think the other big broad theme we want to is the privatization, or whatever name that we call it these days, of ECG. I think it's a big, sort of the big elephant in the room now. And MCC people who are causing the problem in this issue, and I'm using this advisedly as a sense of humor. I have with me, so there's Jonathan Nice in the room. Jonathan, if you would. Jonathan, how come I'm pointing at you? Jonathan, so that's Jonathan. Jonathan, if you would let us, if you would acknowledge Jonathan. That's MCC, the MCC. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan from the MCC. And then Kenneth, who is with Jonathan, who is our country resident director. Yes. In the interest of full disclosure, I advise the MCC in Ghana. So just so you know, I'm not conflicted. The reason why I introduce them is because the minister is going to speak about it, and I want, if there is any rebuttal, they can rebut. So the minister, the ball is in your court.
Well, I think that privatization takes different forms. You know, you can privatize by selling, you know, the company, equity, exchange of equity, or transfer of equity, if you like. You also can, you know, privatize through partnership, you know, management contract, for example. But such management contracts also take different forms. There is one that is just management, pure management, but there is another where you are required to make investment. And so the history of privatization in Ghana has gone through the second model, where you have pure management contracts, such as what we saw with Ghana Water Company. But the investor in that case was not required to make investment. The second model is what we are promoting for ECG, where the concessionaire will not only operate, but will also be required to make investment. And so the MCC has brought in almost $500 million US. And so you have a concessionaire that is going to double it, also bring in $500 million US in investment. And so that's the second model which we really haven't promoted in our past. And so we see this as a unique model that we should adopt this model and see how that also will come to play in the development of our energy sector. But what are we talking about? We have a company, ECG, which is associated with so many challenges. And that is the weakest link within the energy value chain, but the most important, you know, segment of our energy value chain, because they deal directly with the consumer. They are that interface with the consumer. And so during the Doomsday days, if you recall, anytime consumers had problems, although the problem was also caused by generation challenges. ECG had to face the anger of the people. But this is a company that has challenges as far as losses are concerned, up to 24% losses, distribution losses. And you cannot survive as a company, a distribution company, when you have 24% distribution losses. You know, if you look at total collection losses, total losses is about 30%. That's not acceptable. The industry standard is about 10%. And so you will need investment in such a company to reduce the losses, because the money they should accrue, that should accrue to ECG, if they were to reduce the losses, can be plowed back into that company to improve on their capital, to improve on their efficiency. But over the years, because of such losses, so much money is going down the drain, and yet the company has to come back relying on government, for government to use the scarce resources we should be using in building hospitals, in building roads, to capitalize the company. That's not acceptable. The second challenge they have is the power outages, because the systems are not good. The transmission and distribution system is weak. It is also congested. And therefore, in 2016, when we had outages up to 860 outages in a year, and today, in the first quarter of this year, just about 68 outages, you know, tells you that the interventions that we have made since we came into government have worked. And one of the interventions has been to empower ECG, to get PURC to give them higher standards, to hold them more accountable for the things they do in ECG, and that is bearing fruits. And so we are very convinced that if we have a concessionaire that brings in a business model that is built on improving efficiency, that is built on holding workers accountable, we will be able to even get more successes than what we have chalked from the little interventions that we have made. And this is why we are pursuing the policy of privatization for ECG, so that the weakest link becomes stronger. But I think you also know the financial challenges in the sector, which is also largely caused by them. Because of the poor collection rate, because of the distribution losses, they are unable to collect enough to pay for the power they buy from not just VRA, but also the independent power producers. Now, we want to promote independent power production in Ghana. How can you achieve that when they are not paid for the power they sell to the distribution company? That's a major challenge. Up to $2.4 billion of debts, and all of them are coming from the weakest link, poor collection. And so we need to be able to address this financial challenge. The only way you can do that is to bring efficiency into the company. They don't have money to capitalize the company. You want a private investor that will bring in money to capitalize the company. You know, you want them to have a business model that promotes accountability on every worker, so that once we address these challenges, we will have a power sector that is robust, a power sector that can stand on its own, and that can attract further investment and support the industrial development agenda of our government.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Jonathan, you want? Kenneth, you want to make some comments? Sure. Can somebody please? Now you have a mic. I think the mic would do. Yeah.
Good afternoon. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you once again. It's a pleasure for MCC to be partnering here with the government of Ghana, both the public sector and the private sector. We have a long ways to go, but as you'd mentioned, what we're trying to assist is restructuring, in many ways, the distribution side of the equation. We all know Ghana does quite well when it comes to capacity generation. Gridco does good work, but there are challenges to be fixed on the ECG side of the business. I will mention one thing that Andy forgot to mention. This goes back to your question of Power Africa. MCC's $498.2 million investment in Ghana is the largest U.S. government transaction under Power Africa. So we're still alive and well. We have many things to do. It is a long slog, but our hope is that over the next 3 or 4 years, there will be a massive injection of investment into the economy, approximately $500 million from us, $580 million from a private operator, and we can help turn around some of the collection losses, commercial losses, technical losses, and put Ghana on a much more financially stable and more productive network to improve reliability, improve access, and improve affordability.
Thank you, Kenneth. I know I apologize for putting you on the spot, but thank you very much. Now I'm going to I'll take some questions. Anybody who has questions? Yes. Okay. If you would be kind to introduce yourself and then you ask the question.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Funmi Ogunlesi. I work with Citibank, and I want to thank you, Honorable Minister, and members of the panel for your contributions. My question is with regards to ECG, but more in terms of the historical losses. I know that the government of Ghana has put a lot of focus into tackling some of the NPLs and some of the losses, the receivables on the books of ECG. So you had the ESLA bond, and I know that from time to time there might be ESLA 2, ESLA 3, and so on. But in your opinion, sir, this was the Honourable Minister, have those losses now been contained? What is to prevent them building up again after ESLA? And is there anything in the plan on pricing?
So I think I'll take maybe 2, 3 questions, and then I would allow the panelists to answer. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colum. I was in Miami for about 40 years. I'm back home. I'm just excited to see my American brothers down here, sisters, of course, but being in the U.S. for about 40 years. I've gone to Slovakia, I've gone to Russia, all over the place to bring investment down here, and I was wondering when America will ever come home. I'm now representing some companies from Kyrgyzstan, Slovakia, and I think Germany. Again, in terms of energy, garbage recycling, real estate, and what have you. So I'm really excited out here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Would you be kind to hand him the mic? Yes.
My name is Jan Helge Skogen. I'm the country manager for Aker Energy in Ghana. We have just taken over the Hess assets here in Ghana. I'm from Norway, and I will make a comment on local content. I think in Norway we have actually seen all the benefits of really focusing and developing local content. And I would like to kind of compliment the Vice Minister talking about long-term planning, because I think that is key in developing local content. You really need a long-term perspective, and you also need kind of a continuous stream of projects coming into the industry. That is very important, because companies and people seeking for employment, they would like a continuous activity, and they would also like to see the long-term perspective of what they are doing. And also about partnership. I think to be able to develop local content, you need local competence. So very early in Norway, there was a partnership established between the industry, oil and gas companies and the service companies, the government and the educational institution and the research institution, to really secure that we also developed local competence through the educational system. So I think that type of partnership is also very important in the development of local content. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Ghana. Please, make sure you get some Ghana jollof whilst you're here. Yes. I will take the last question, and then we'll allow the Minister to answer the question about historical losses. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Romeo Jones, and I work with the Caris Global Group. I'm addressing the Minister with regards to, thank you, with regards to quotas and immigration facilities for some of the resources that work within the energy industry. We have a situation where to get regulation through the Petroleum Commission, for instance, the process takes 3 months before you get an expert to support you to get an assignment done. However, with regard to short-term consultants that work within the industry, some come just 2 months, and 2 months to do an assignment and they are done. But for them to do that assignment legitimately, before you get the approval in the 3rd month, they've already have done that assignment. So then the need for you to get them working legitimately will then have been defeated. So would there be some kind of policy review to facilitate the local content technology transfer? Because if somebody must be in for just 2 months and the current regulation of the Petroleum Commission is 3 months and he doesn't get it done, then he will just come work illegally. There's no taxes declared, and the government also loses money because we cannot get a rare rights permit for him to work and we tax him. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, I think we would now ask.
Yeah, so I'll take the first question on the legacy debt, which, as you rightly said, we are retiring through the ESLA bond. But to ensure that we do not accumulate more debts, we have decided as a government to introduce what we call a cash waterfall mechanism, which will ensure that the revenue once collected is distributed fairly and consistently to all players in the value chain so that nobody is left out. Because what is important for an industry like power is to have sustained cash flow. And so the cash waterfall mechanism will ensure that there is sustained cash flow in the accounts of all the players in the value chain. But if the cash waterfall has to succeed, then the collection side has to be effective, because it is only when the money has gone into the basket that it can be distributed to all the players. And this is why we believe that through the concession arrangement for ECG, the concessionaire will bring technology that will enhance collection by ECG. The second one is to also introduce more prepaid metering system. Eventually, the plan is to have 90% prepaid meters all over the country over the medium term. That will ensure that people pay before they consume, and that will improve on the collection. But what has been challenging also for some time now is the public sector non-payment of bills. The Ministry of Finance over the years had to take over the responsibility of paying the bills. The bills were not paid. They changed the model by giving the money to agencies to pay for their consumption. They were not paying for the consumption. Now, what government wants to do is to introduce solar lighting in all public buildings across the country. This will not only reduce the dependence on the national grid, but will also reduce the debt, the financial burden consumption from the national grid is having on government. And so we believe that with these interventions, we will be able to stop the further losses or further accumulation of debts, so that we can have a financially stronger power sector.
The next one was about
the next one,
permits. Short-term assignments, yes.
Well, we've also come to terms with the fact that our strategy for aggressive exploration and attracting investors into our oil and gas industry will not succeed if you have an environment which is not enabling enough. And this is one example of a regulation that seeks to thwart the efforts of investors to do their operations in Ghana. And so what the Honorable Minister for Energy has done is set up a tripartite committee, which I chair. And the membership is myself, the CEO of the Petroleum Commission, and then the CEO of the GNPC, to discuss with industry to understand the challenges they face, so that through that committee, we will have fast-track measures to address those challenges, so that our regulations do not become a barrier to attracting investment into the industry. So we've had our first meeting, and This was necessitated by complaints, several complaints from the operators, Cosmos Energy, Talo Oil, all complaining about the difficulties they face within our regulatory sphere. And therefore, the minister had to respond. Whilst we have regulations that require us to enforce the content of the regulations, we also must temper sometimes these regulations with our desire to get investment into Ghana. But I must also put on record that some companies have also violated some of these regulations. And that may be the reason the new leadership at the Petroleum Commission has become so strong in enforcing some of these regulations that we consider disrupting your operations. And so we need to be able to strike a balance between having effective regulations and compliance, but at the same time able to temper the regulations where it is necessary to allow for smooth operations by investors. That is the way I think we should go to address these challenges.
Thank you. Kofi, you relocated from the US, still on local content, and working for Cosmos. What has been the Cosmos experience from an industry point of view?
Okay. I think...
Pardon? As the president of the chamber, if I don't ask a nice question, you're going to ban me from coming here.
And also, so that's my country manager, so yes, to speak to it. I think local content is extremely important. As Cosmos, we think it's one of the great ways to actually create a long-term industry. If you look at when the Mahogany One well actually made a successful find to where we are now, a lot of progress has been made, not only from a Cosmos perspective, but looking at the general industry and amongst our partners as well. For Cosmos, I think the immediate focus was on building the necessary skills to support the business. But I think one thing that we should all be mindful of is in most cases, in planning ahead, you need to make sure you understand specifically what the value chain actually demands. So exploration phase demands a certain set of skills. And if you're looking at people who used to walk in the doors, either trying to provide a service, there was a clear understanding that most people didn't really understand the entire value chain. A lot of work has been done in that area. Most of the people that walk into Cosmos's office have a clear idea of exactly what they want to do. But that said, if you look at Cosmos, currently we have 45 employees. All of us are Ghanaians. And we also have a lot of employees that hitherto worked in the areas of geology or geosciences and also engineering that we've seconded to other projects that we have in, let's say, Senegal. We have a lot of folks that are actually embedded within our Dallas organization as well. Those have been key to, for us in helping move the agenda forward when it comes to local content. But I think then again, I'll go back to the first point I mentioned, and I think the gentleman from Accra mentioned the same thing. You have to look at this over a long term. Nothing happens overnight. Even if you look at the agreement, like I said, it's a 30-year arrangement that you have. So it's going to take a little while to get the capacity built up to a place where it actually makes sense. And from a competitive standpoint, for service providers, local service providers to provide the quality that's needed. And it's not only the quality, but you have to do it within a certain price that is reasonable as well. So I think if we can keep on focusing on those issues, we should be fine.
Very good. Uncle Mensa, he probably will need a salary increment. The way that he has spoken about your company. Any more questions? Yes. Yeah.
Hello. I'm Kwabena Prado, Connectus Energy, a small independent company. Honorable Minister, or Deputy Minister, I have a small concern with your answer in regards to the energy efficiency around the companies or state enterprises not paying their bills. You talked about implementing solar so that we're more energy efficient. one of the key concerns, obviously, in our houses, most of us, when you don't pay your bill, you get cut. And obviously, the government has also moved to prepaid meters, where I believe the collection rate is far exceeds 100%, because some people buy it and they don't actually even use it. So why don't we look at some of these solutions, such as prepaid meters, rather than potentially spending more government money or taxpayers' money more efficiently, more correct, sorry, so that we address the root cause of the problem, rather than potentially looking at other solutions that may not be optimal.
Okay. I said we should be nice to the Minister, Kwabena. Thank you. Any more questions? Minister, you know, if the Minister speaks very well, people don't like to ask him questions. Yes, you are the back. Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to add another point to the local content issues as well. I wanted to add another point to the local content issues. My name is Grant. I've worked in the U.S. government in the past. I now help American companies invest in Africa. One other issue which I think does not get enough attention is that sometimes when the laws are passed and then gazetted later on, many months later, as has recently happened here, and there's some uncertainty in terms of a committee to make decisions, but it hasn't been formed, or some real issues to be worked out, that uncertainty can deter investment. I know of some companies too that want to use Power Africa tools. They want the Overseas Private Investment Corporation and other resources for financing, but those entities always want to understand the law and the risk. And so one thing I would urge is, even in pursuing the goal of local content, to ensure that that certainty and clarity exists, because without it, if you don't know if it applies to your project, or if it might trip change in law provisions, or if it might upset financing that has been planned, it can be a dramatic setback to the deal and to shared goals of electrifying the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, why don't you finish this one quickly?
Okay. But let me just respond to your point. I thought I mentioned two main objectives why government may have to install solar in public buildings. The non-payment of bills is just one side of it. But even if you use prepaid meters, government will still have to pay for the power that is consumed. And so I'm saying that when you install solar in public buildings, it reduces the financial burden the national grid has on government finances. That is one. And the second objective is reducing the over-reliance on the national grid. And so if government financial burden is reduced, you know, it also helps with the collection. It improves on the collection. Having to debate with government to use prepaid meters, and when people consume, government will still have to find the money to pay. And if government doesn't have the money for them to buy the meters before they consume, then what you are saying is that our agencies must operate in darkness. That is not going to happen. And therefore, if you install solar in public buildings, you reduce the financial burden on government. Government can then use the money for other purposes, other productive purposes as well. The other issue is certainty of the local content policy.
And regulations generally.
And regulations. You know, fortunately for us, we have regulations governing local content in Ghana. And therefore, you will do well consulting with some of our local experts who understand the local content environment much better, who understand the regulations, so they can help you to appreciate the content and the implications of not complying with our local content policy. The policy doesn't vary. It's well laid out in the regulations. And you will do well to consult with local experts who can help you understand the policy.
Leader, you perhaps want to comment about what's going on.
Well, I'm not going to. I thought it was interesting in terms of your mentioning of meters, because I think that apart from government's decision on their own public buildings, that there is a lot that technology can do that generally lowers the costs across the entire distribution of electricity. And that the losses in Ghana are actually pretty good for the region. This is a challenge that we see in Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria, And in Nigeria, where they did privatize the distribution companies, you know, the first order of business, or among their first orders of business, was to see what technologies could have the quickest and strongest impact on that reduction, both in a technical and commercial side. And the ability now of very low cost, for one example, meters is something that the Port Harcourt distribution company found enabled them not only to reduce their losses, but to cover lower income neighborhoods than they were previously able to do so on a commercial basis, because of the ability to communicate without having to send people out. And it's on that basis, actually, that we are hosting a orientation visit across West Africa for distribution officials to come to the U.S. to look at technologies like that and others that could be put in place and reduce the overall cost. Because obviously it's a challenge for government, but anything that you can do that lowers the overall price, overall cost, can lower the price to consumers, which is, I know, a priority of the government here as you look to strengthen and grow the economy.
Thank you very much. You have a question? Yes, if you can. Yes.
Okay. So I have a little question on the ripple effect of local content. There are two ways that we look at local content. One is from the international companies' perspective. Some international companies have done a good job on expanding their local presence. Meanwhile, other international companies who have had similar opportunities haven't done so. So how are we physically monitoring how international companies are expanding local content? Now down to the local companies. Local companies are getting jobs and are doing business but are not expanding, because we don't typically monitor our own local companies, which centers all the local investment into very few hands. We've had companies who have had contracts since 2010, but would still call themselves small companies and will still crave local content. Whereas we've had same local companies who started with the same amount, having business from 2010, but have made major strides in the industry. These ones who still call themselves small companies, you would realize that they employ nobody. They do not do anything, but it's simply to stay in the box and generate some income. Same goes for the international. So I think when the monitoring also comes, we look at both international and we look at the locals as well. And then we also measure how much impact each of these companies have made to the country.
Thank you. Ikemi, you want to have a question, and then this would be our last question. So if...
My name is Akenem Isikche. So consider all the great work that USTDA, USADF is doing, and Cosmos and the rest of them are doing in Ghana. Sorry. So consider all the great work that the US corporations are doing in Ghana, USADF, USTDA, Cosmos, and the rest of them are doing in Ghana. I'm a bit curious to learn from the energy minister around considering migration from rural areas to the urban areas, new industries, energy pressures. Does Ghana have a strong execution plan around how they're going to address some of the energy pressures maybe 2-3 years from now? As you know, if you look at Nigeria, it's a mess. So I'm just wondering how Ghana is going to plan ahead for the migration and industrialization and development as it comes. Thank you.
For somebody who comes from Nigeria, that's not a nice thing to say. Yes. Would you be kind to give the mic to
Thank you very much. My name is Kwame Adukufo. I'm from the mining sector. Kwame Adukufo from the mining sector and from Newmont. I think we haven't heard much about mining today. But on the issue of local content, I think there should be a deliberate and concerted effort to build local capacity. Because the mining sector finds itself in this situation. We are an older sector than the oil sector. We have the mining laws, and there are 99 terms we can source. Look, we get competitive, reliable local supply? And if you're talking about, I mean, somebody was talking about the global village and how competitive companies must be worldwide, do we have reliable local sources? So it's not just about having the laws, it's about building local capacity to ensure that we can reduce input costs and make Ghana an attractive destination for investment.
Thank you. And the organizers want me to thank Newmont very well for sponsoring this event as well. That's a good plug for you. Our good friend Aisha is here. So PwC, thank you very much for sponsoring the event as well. Yes. And last question.
Hello, my name is Akusia Apiao Safo from JLD and MB Legal Consultancy. So this is just a comment rather than a question. It's just a comment on the question about clarity or certainty on the local content rules. So just quickly to add that, for example, for the energy industry, because we have new local content regulations for the energy industry which came into effect this year, I know the Energy Commission are currently working on guidelines for the local content rules for the energy industry. So that's something to look out for, which we understand will shed more clarity and show whatever differences would apply between wholesale suppliers, retail suppliers, renewable, and those in the renewable sector as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Mr. Minister.
I'll start with the last question from Mr. Adokufo. I usually draw attention to something happening in the mining sector, which the government lately has been struggling to stop. And that is the issue of galamsey. Because I've done some work in mining communities as well. And when you talk to them, the reasons they give you for doing illegal mining is that they also want to benefit from the exploitation of the resource. They want to benefit. If we were to be doing oil development the way mining is being done, I'm sure we'll have galamseyers in the oil business as well. But because of the technology required to do the oil business, because of the capital required to do the oil business, you don't have the galamseyers in the oil business. But if you don't get galamseyers, you can get ruthless young people who are so angry because they have not received any benefits, you know, attacking your workers, sabotaging you by destroying your pipelines, etc., etc., etc. And so, even if it was not for purposes of partnering with a country to build local capacity, for your own legitimacy and for the harmony you need to have with communities where you are located, it is in our interest and in the interest of the company to have that as part of your strategy. And this is the point I was talking about earlier. That is very essential for our country. Otherwise, you are going to further spend so much money on security. I know how much oil companies are spending in Nigeria on security. Security which should be provided by the government. But government has not been able to provide that security, and oil companies are having to foot the bill. So investing that money in security versus investing it to build the capacity of the people, there certainly should be a preference for a company that wants to do business and to stay in that area for long, so you can be able to recover all your costs and make profit and get the returns for your investment. So that is the reality of the issue we are faced with when it comes to local content. And I just think that we should try to understand the context within which we all operate. Secondly, we came into government and realized that, yes, we have developed so many laws, but we really have not made the attempt, the effort we needed to make to develop the local capacity of our suppliers. And so if you look at the Jubilee Field, for instance, most of the contracts and the jobs are at the development phase of the industry. When a field is being developed, that is where most of the jobs are. We lost many opportunities in Jubilee. Being the first commercial field that was developed, we would not have developed the capacity of our local suppliers to be able to get the businesses they needed. So we lost on that. We lost out on the 10 cluster of fields. We lost out on the ENI Sankofa field. And so we recognize as a government that this trend should not continue if we want to be serious about positioning our local suppliers to get business and make money that will stay in the country, okay? And this is why the government launched the Accelerated Oil and Gas Capacity Program. We call it accelerated for a reason. Because of the background that we are coming from, having lost opportunities in the development of 3 major fields, first-class fields, we needed to accelerate the pace of positioning our people to work and compete for these contracts. And this is why we launched the Accelerated Oil. And we are already taking actions that will, give our local suppliers the capacity they need to be able to meet the quality, to be able to supply, in time for the contractors, and also to be able to price competitively. This is the reason why we launched the Accelerated Oil and Gas Capacity Program. So over time, we should be able to address that issue. Although some people will say it's too late in the day. We think that it's better late than never. And this is why we are making these efforts at the moment. The next issue that was raised here is about providing energy to meet our industrial needs. As you know, the government flagship industrialization program, which is the One District, One Factory program, is to ensure that we build factories in the countryside, in every district, that will employ local people so they do not migrate to the urban areas. There are other development efforts that are being made in those areas so they can stay, such as farming. We have a Planting for Food and Jobs program, which is also engaging farmers at the local level and helping them modernize agriculture, so that they can do commercial farming at some point. And so these are all efforts to keep people in the rural community so they do not drift towards the urban area. But I also want to underscore the fact that if you want to build industries in rural areas, you also need to be able to meet the power needs of industry. Under our rural education programs, as you know, a lot of communities and villages already have access. 85% access nationwide is no mean achievement. I think within the West Africa sub-region, this is the highest you can find. And we are still making efforts to ensure that 15% also get access. But the type of energy we provide that will be enough for industry is what we need to look at going forward. And so the government has set up a committee on the One District, One Factory program, which is looking at the power needs, the power requirements for that program. And so in due course, we should be able to address this challenge. And finally, in terms of monitoring of local content, the Petroleum Commission has now set up a local content audit unit. In the past, I don't think they were monitoring effectively. So even the local spend, they could not get us the figures. So they've set up an audit unit which has sole responsibility of monitoring the local content policy implementation, as well as the programs and plans that have been submitted by companies and that have been approved by the PC. And they've just done a certain exercise in the first quarter of this year, which shows that, yes, some companies are not complying, but there are other companies that are actually doing more than what they were known to be doing through the audit, And so we have, we believe that if the audit unit is supported to build its own capacity, they can do proper monitoring, and we can be able to determine the impact of local content on our economy. At the end of it all, as I said, this is a global industry. And therefore, we want to be able to send Ghanaians to Senegal, to Mauritania, to other places, And the only way we can do that is to position them well, give them the skills that they can compete anywhere in the world. And that is the kind of partnership we want companies to partner with us to do in our country.
On that note, should we give the minister a round of applause? A round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this, I think, very insightful session. Leader, thank you very much for joining us. CD, thank you very much. Kofi, I've already made a plug for you. And the Energy Ministry is actually one of the most efficient ministry you would find. Letters to the ministry, I can attest to that.